Hi everybody, I'm Jack Reda with Future Pastimes. Future Pastimes are the designers of the classic Dune board game. This is the 2019 edition published by Gale Force 9. Now those same designers and I all designed Dune Conquest, which is also published by Gale Force 9. And a lot of times I'm asked, is Dune Conquest just a reskinning of Dune? And by reskinning, I mean it's the exact same game. It's just using imagery from the movie instead of the imagery from the game. And the answer is no, it is not a reskin. Now there is some overlap there in the Venn diagram of these two games, but they are quite a bit different and they were designed to be different. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the ways that they are similar, but also how they're different and why one game might be better for you than the other, but also why both of them are games that you should consider getting. Because why not? They are different. They're going to scratch different itches and be appropriate at different times. So let's dive in and look at some of the ways that they are similar. To back it up a little bit, we were approached by Gale Force 9 about the idea of doing a reskin using the movie imagery, but we were more interested in seeing if we could move into uncharted territories. And Gale Force 9 thought that was great. They thought that maybe having a version of Dune that is a little more mass market friendly would be a good idea, especially as people see the movie and they're going to go see this game in the store, recognize the characters and actors from the movie and think, oh, let's get that game. If it's an impulse buy by someone who's not a hardcore gamer, this is going to be a much more appropriate purchase for you than this one will be. This one makes a great gateway to this one. So we'll get into that a little bit more at the end. So that was the driving force. And the other reason that we couldn't really do a reskin is just because a lot of the characters in classic Dune were not going to be in the movie, and those actors would not be depicted, so it was going to be a challenge anyway. So with the idea of having something that was a little more mass market friendly, we knew that we needed to strip down some of the complexities of classic Dune, but we also needed to streamline the gameplay. Now, classic Dune has a reputation for being a bit of a long game, and that is absolutely fair. It can go 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, just depending on the number of players, how long it takes people to figure stuff out. There's a lot of negotiating and talking things over, so it can run a little bit long. And we knew that that was just not going to be a good idea for mass market movie Dune. So we examined the parts of Dune that make the game longer, and we determined that the alliances would make things longer. The bidding rounds definitely make things longer. A lot of the shipping and movement is also a long phase. So those are areas that we looked at to try to find ways to streamline the gameplay. But we knew that the thing that people seemed to like the most about Dune was its brilliant take on the combat system. So that is pretty much intact in Dune Conquest. So by which we mean that you're going to have battle wheels, the two players fighting in a battle. You're going to put a leader disc in there, and you're going to dial the number of your forces you're willing to sacrifice to win, and these two numbers together, whichever player has the higher total is going to win. And you're going to be able to add a weapon and defense to your battle plan to potentially kill the other player's leader so that their value does not contribute to the overall score. And a defense, of course, to protect your leader from certain types of attacks. So that is exactly the same. It's exactly the same, I should say, as basic Dune, because the classic Dune game has a basic mode and an advanced mode, and the spice dialing in the advanced mode is a little bit different, a little more complex. Very similar, but you're not dialing the number of your forces, you're dialing your strength of your forces, and that's a different video, which I've already done. So the combat is the same. But let's go down through the different phases and look at a couple of things that are different, and then I'll talk about the things that have nothing to do with the turns and phases that still make the game different. So in classic Dune, your storm movement is going to be determined by two players dialing 1 to 3 on a battle wheel. And in advanced, it'll be used with the storm deck if the Fremen are in the game. And that's cards numbered from 1 to 6, and you'll randomly draw one. And the Fremen, of course, will know how far the storm's moving. In Movie Dune, you're rolling a die. It's an 8-sided die. It's got 0 to 6, and there's a storm icon. If you roll 0, the storm doesn't move. If you roll a number, it'll move that many spaces, and 0 is a number. Yes, thanks. And if you roll the storm icon, then the player rolling the die is going to determine how far the storm moves from 0 to 6. And that turn order is actually going to just move around the table in storm order. So everyone's going to get a chance to be the first player at least once. Whereas the first player is determined by the storm, and it's going to shift around. You could be the first player a couple of turns in a row. You might never be the first player. It just depends on how long the game goes. The Spice Blow, you're flipping over a spice card in Classic Dune. You're doing the same thing in Dune Conquest. All the territories in Dune Conquest are double spice blows. So here you're going to put 6 spice in 2 different territories. In Classic Dune, you've got a spice card in basic and 2 spice cards in advanced. So a little bit different there, very similar, but not quite the same. You still have sandworms that show up in Dune Conquest just as they do in Classic Dune. But one of the big differences here is that Classic Dune goes up to 10 turns. And of course, the original Avalon Hill version went up to 15, but Dune Conquest only goes up to 5. And the other thing is that players cannot win the game on turns 1 and 2. So you're definitely going to be playing at least 3 turns. You win by trying to get 5 strongholds, just like you do in Classic Dune. However, at the end of turn 5, if someone has not won by occupying 3 strongholds, then the winner is whoever has the most spice. And that is a big change from Classic Dune and contributes to this being a very different gaming experience, because you can be going for spice right away from turn 1, not that worried about trying to control 3 strongholds. You just keep going after spice. There's always going to be 2 spice blows. One of them might be affected by the storm, but both of them won't be. So you're incentivized to be the one who goes after that spice, and you can, instead of trying to control 3 strongholds, just focus on preventing somebody else from controlling 3 strongholds, which might be easier. If you're willing to sacrifice your forces and max dial, then sometimes that can work for you. So the fact that you have that alternate win condition is a big change from Classic Dune. And any stronghold that you do occupy at the end of that turn counts as 5 spice. So you're incentivized to go after the stronghold still, but if you've got a lot of spice and you can prevent the win, then occupying strongholds is not as critical to you. You just got to make sure that someone else doesn't get the 3. So moving on. There's no Chome Charity phase in Classic Dune. That's a phase in Movie Dune. In Classic Dune, when you get to that 3rd phase, if you don't have at least 2 spice, you're going to get spice from the bank until you do have 2. It's done a little bit differently in Movie Dune or Dune Conquest, and I'll explain how that works when I get to the appropriate phase. So then we come to the bidding round. Now, in Classic Dune, you're going to have a number of cards that will go up for bid based on the number of players who don't already have full hands when you get to that phase. And you're auctioning these cards without knowing what they are. And you're bidding your spice to get there. And this is sometimes a pretty long phase as the bids can go around. You can pass and then come back into a bid if it has increased. So this was an area that we knew that we wanted to streamline it. So what happens here in Dune Conquest is you just buy cards. They cost 2 spice each, and you can go up to a hand of 3. But here's another big difference between the 2 games that I want to point out. So you are bidding on treachery cards in Classic Dune, and these will include defenses and weapons and special effects, as well as worthless cards. But in Dune Conquest, we've actually divided cards up into 2 decks. We have a battle deck and a market deck. Now, when you get to this phase, which in Dune Conquest is called the gain cards phase, it's not called the bidding phase, you're going to draw battle cards until you have 4, and that's every player. And you don't spend anything. You just have 4 battle cards. And the battle cards are going to be your weapons and your defenses, your crysknife and your shield, It's going to also contain a couple of worthless cards like Jubba Cloak, and then some special effects cards like this one's called Endless Ranks, which is not in Classic Dune. It allows you to dial as high as the number of forces. So you can dial a 0 and wait to see what you need to dial when you've got this in place of a weapon or a defense. And then you've got a couple of special weapons like Lace Gun. So this is what you get in your battle deck. The market deck is where you've got all of your special effects. So you have things like this one's called Plots Within Plots. And with this one, you get to draw a trader card from the trader deck, add it to your hand, and then discard one of the traders that you have. So you could change the trader that you have, or you could, if you've revealed that one already, you could draw one and then keep it because the players don't know which one that you've discarded because you're actually shuffling it back into the deck. This one here is called Ornithopter. It's going to let you move one group of your forces up to 4 territories or move 2 groups up to 3 territories each. You've got Counterattack. This you're going to be playing after your battle plans are revealed. You're going to add 4 to your battle plan, so it's a surprise. They all tell you what phase you can play them. And yeah, you can have a hand of 3 of those. So 4 battle cards. Everyone's going to have 4 battle cards when they get to the next phase. And then you can buy up to 3 market cards. And you play them, and then in the next turn you can buy more. So that was a big difference. And the reason for that was we wanted players to be able to get into the action, really start fighting it out right from turn 1. You were armed to the teeth. You were ready to go out there and fight for spice, fight for the control of the strongholds, do what you want. There is a chance that you might draw all defenses and you have no weapons. And the only way to get rid of them is to get into a fight and play one, and then you can get rid of it. So there's a little bit of that you've got to deal with. But that's a scenario that could exist in Classic Dune anyway. You've spent all your hard-earned spice to buy cards, and you have 4 defenses. So that doesn't change at all. Next, you have your revival phase. So in the revival phase for Classic Dune, you're going to have a certain number of free revivals depending on which faction you're playing. So the Fremen have 3 free revival. The Emperor has 1. A lot of the factions have 2. And then you can buy for 2 spice per force additional forces until you have revived 3. You can't revive your leaders unless all of them are unavailable. And then you pay their strength. In Dune Conquest, we've loosened that up a little bit. You can buy your leaders right away. So if Duncan Idaho gets killed, you can buy him the next turn. He'd cost you 2 spice, and then off you go. 3 spice, because we bumped Duncan Idaho up by 1 in this version. You can also, you've got free revival. Everyone still has some, and for all the factions, in fact, I think it's 2 forces. But then you have unlimited numbers of additional forces that you can buy. It's still 2 spice each. So if you've collected a lot of spice, because there are 2 spice blows every turn, there's a lot more spice on the board, generally speaking, in Dune Conquest than you have in Classic Dune. So yeah, you can buy more forces. So revival, very similar, but not quite the same. Then we move into shipment and movement. That is very close to the same. You're going to do 1 shipment action, just as you would in Classic Dune, and then you're going to do 1 movement action where you're moving any number of forces from one territory to another. The way that it differs is that the default movement rate in Classic Dune is 1 territory. Now, if you have control or you have forces starting in Arrakeen or Carthag, then you have 3 territory movement for whichever stack of your forces you want to move, and the Fremen have 2 movement. But that's how it is. In Dune Conquest, everyone can move 3. So you can always move 3 territories. The other difference is with the shipping, it costs 1 spice per force to ship into a stronghold in Classic Dune, but 2 spices to ship outside of a stronghold. In Dune Conquest, it's 1 spice per force, no matter where you ship. And again, it's because we wanted to encourage players to be able to easily get to any territories that they wanted to. They can ship straight to the spice blow. It's easier to get there, which means you're more likely to get into fights over the spice, over the strongholds. There are still some challenges. Of course, even with 3 territory movement, you can't quite get everywhere you want to go all the time. So they still have that tension of, oh, well, if I can ship into Carthage, I can move into Arakeen or into Tabor, but I can't get to the other two territories. There's no way to ship into any of those territories and then get to another stronghold. So that's pretty much the same. We get to combat. Combat is the same. You're still making those battle plans. They still consist of the same four things: a leader, a number dialed, weapon, and defense. The only way to get rid of worthless cards is to play them in your battle plan. Other special cards would replace a weapon or defense and can be added into a battle plan like that. And then the faction advantages, which I'll cover here in a second, will become applicable. And then the order of battle is determined by the first player. So it's a first player marker that moves. It rotates around. Each player takes turns being the first player. They would do their battles first, and if there are multiple battles, they'll pick the order in which they want to fight them, and they will win ties if there is a tie. So it's very similar to the aggressor model that's used by Storm Order in Classic Dune, but here it's more predictable. You know, all right, in turn 3, this player over here is going to be the first player. They're going to have advantage on ties. They're going to be picking the order of battles, so that you can predict, but it's it's easy to follow. Then you have the spice collection phase. So here in Dune Conquest, you will collect spice. If you're in a territory, it's 2 spice per force that you have there. It doesn't matter if you control Arakeen or Carthage. It's always 2 spice per force. And if you don't have any spice at the end of that, or if you have less than 3 spice, you're going to be collecting spice from the bank until you have 3. So that's kind of where we put the Chome Charity element. We don't call it Chome Charity. It's just part of spice collection. Anyone who, after spice is collected from the board, doesn't have at least 3 spice, they're going to get that on there. And there's no Mentat pause phase. You just, right there, you check to see, did somebody win because they have 3 strongholds? No? Then you go to the next turn. And again, if it's turn 1 or 2, nobody can win. So you're just going to go to the next turn. You'll rotate your first player marker counterclockwise, or storm order, as we like to say, and you start over with the next turn. So those are a lot of the big differences in terms of the phases and what goes on the board. Let's talk a little bit about how the factions are different. So Classic Dune, the base game comes with 6 factions. You've got the Atreides, the Harkonnen, the Emperor, the Bene Gesserit, the Fremen, and the Spacing Guild. And of course, there's a couple of expansions that add additional factions. We'll leave expansions out of it for now. Dune Conquest has 4 factions. It's got Atreides and Harkonnen, and it's got Fremen. And then it has a faction that's just called Imperium. And the Imperium faction is composed of elements of the Sardaukar and the Bene Gesserit, as well as there's a courtier and the guy who brings the contract out to Caladan and gets the Duke to sign and seal it. So that's one of the leaders on there. So there's no Emperor, because the Emperor wasn't in that first movie. And the Bene Gesserit is not a discretely different faction. Although what we did do is, one of the faction advantages that the Emperor has in Classic Dune is that when people buy cards during the bidding phase, they pay the Emperor. Well, similarly here, if the Imperium is in the game, when people buy market cards, they pay that spice to the Imperium. Similarly, the Bene Gesserit have the voice in Classic Dune, and we have given the voice to the Imperium as well. And, you know, the Bene Gesserit, they're part of the Imperium, and the Reverend Mother Mohiam is the Emperor's truthsayer. So there's definitely a connection, but a lot of it was just constraint. Like, we could only work with what was in that first movie, and there weren't enough Bene Gesserit in there to really be their own faction, and there wasn't an Emperor. There wasn't enough of an imperial presence in terms of the throne to have that faction. So if there's an expansion to Movie Dune, then we know that the Emperor is in that second movie. So that's a possibility for its own. And that's our problem to figure out. And I could say we've already figured it out, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So the factions are a little bit more simplified in terms of what they do. So you could have the Bene Gesserit faction in Classic Dune. It's got its basic game advantages. And then you flip it over, it's got a lot of advanced game advantages. So definitely more complex. This is a deeper strategy game. This is why it's not a game that's appropriate for, Johnny, who's 11, and Grandma and to play in the same same game. It's a little bit, depends on who your grandma is, of course, and how you've been raising Johnny. So I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but Dune Conquest was definitely designed to be a little bit more accessible. So your faction advantages, they're all summed up. There's not a whole lot there that you need to learn and keep track of. It's pretty straightforward. On the sheet, and the sheets are public, you can see everybody's leaders and their value, so you know that. You got a little space for your spice. You're going to keep your leader discs face down here, so when you need to pick a leader, you're going to sort through them so that nobody knows who you've chosen. All that's available. Your amount of spice is public. In Classic Dune, of course, you have the shields, because how much spice you have, you're going to keep secret. You can keep secret how many treachery cards you have, although during the bidding phase, at the end of that, everyone's going to know how many cards. That's public information. But then later on, they got to just remember, like, oh, do you still have 4 cards, or did you lose one? I don't remember, but that's public information. Everything is pretty much public, except which leader you're going to use in a battle. The other thing that's exactly the same is the trader mechanism. So there's a set of trader cards, and each one corresponds to a leader disc, and you're going to do that exactly the same way. You're going to draw 4 and choose 1 to keep, and then the rest will get shuffled back into the deck, because the Harkonnen advantage, they only have 1 advantage, but it's a doozy, and it's all about traders. They're going to draw a certain number of trader cards after everyone has shuffled their cast-offs back into that deck. So they'll have their 1 trader that they've kept. The other 3 are going to go back into the deck, and then the Harkonnen are going to draw a certain number. So in a 4-player game, they're going to draw 8 cards, and then they're going to pick 4 to keep and shuffle the other 4 back in. But furthermore, every time Harkonnen are in a battle, they can draw the top card of the trader deck, add it to their hand, and then take any one of their traders and put it on the bottom of the deck. And so they are really all about the traders. They don't have the additional treachery card advantage that they do in Classic Dune, where every time they buy a card, they get another one for free, and their hand size is doubled. Here, like I said, we stripped things down in many ways. It's very simple for the Harkonnen. You're just doing the traders, and that's the key to your success. With the Fremen, they've got a couple of advantages that are similar. Oh, that's the wrong one. Here we go. The Fremen, their forces are not destroyed by the storm, so that's pretty straightforward. If a sandworm is drawn during the spice blow phase and they've got forces in that territory, they can still ride the worm. There are big differences with shipping and movement. They're going to be the only faction in Dune Conquest that starts the game with forces on the board. And it says right there, they're going to start with 5 forces on the board. None of the other factions start on the board. And then every turn, as their shipping action, the Fremen are going to bring 5 forces into the polar sink, and that's where their starting 5 forces are. They're in the polar sink. And then they get to have basically 2 movements. They can move 2 different stacks of forces up to 3 territories, or they can move 1 group up to 6 territories. So they've got a little bit more flexibility there in terms of their movement. And that's because they can't ship directly into Habanya, for instance. They can't even get there unless they do 1 movement up to 6. So that is how they work. We talked about the Imperium. They have those 2 advantages. And with the Atreides, they still have the battle plan prescience. They get to see 1 part of the battle plan. And they just have more leaders than everybody else. So everyone else has 5. Atreides has 7. And that was partly because we're like, which one of these actors are we going to not include? It was just kind of a silly idea. So we were like, all right, let's put them all in there. And that's part of what they've got. They're less likely to have a traitor just because there's more of them. So they can kind of get around that a little bit more. So that is the other thing that makes it different. The other thing we've included is there are these 2 special sheets, and this is for a 2-player version where you want to do combined factions. So this is the Atreides and Fremen combined, and it is essentially just all of the advantages from the individual sheets on one, and then you have the Imperium and the Harkonnen combined. You're not going to have twice as many leaders. You're going to be randomly selecting an appropriate number. It's going to be 5 leaders for these and 7 for these 2. But then the other advantages are combination of the advantages from the previous factions. And that brings me to the player count. So I said that Dune Conquest only plays up to 4. It's for 2, 3, or 4 players, and it plays really well at all 3 player counts. It is a good 2-player game, and one of the ways that you do the 2-player game is you eliminate one of the strongholds. We have these tokens that are placed over a stronghold, and it makes it a desert territory. So in a 2-player game, there aren't as many strongholds to go to, so you are going to be fighting. If you're going for the stronghold victory, it's not easy to just, well, I'm going to put in these 2, you put in those 2, and then we'll fight over one. You're going to be fighting over more than one in a 2-player game. Classic Dune plays more players. You can do 5 or 6 players, but it's also famously best at 6 players. And as the player count gets lower, the experience is I think, a little bit lessened. I think it's a great 5-player game still. I think it still plays really well at 4. I think basic at 4 is also extremely good. The original designers will tell you that it plays great at 3, and that's because there were 3 of them, and they played a lot of 3-player Dune. And actually, honestly, it is still a pretty good game. It's a good game at 3 players. 2 players, no. Don't. Why? No, it just doesn't work at 2. Why would you even try? But Dune Conquest is a good 2-player game. So if you are somebody who is into a really good deep strategy game and you don't mind that this is going to be a several hour-long experience, then Classic Dune is a great game. For me, it's the most thematic board game out there. It captures Dune perfectly. This game has been around since 1979, and it still holds up really well. It's a great game. It's got some unpredictability, but there's a lot that you can kind of figure out, you can piece together, you can plan for. You know that even if you don't have the right weapon or the right defense, you can still win a battle, but it's going to be costly in terms of forces. And just so many great thematic elements, using family atomics to blow the shield wall. Spoiler alert. Woo! It's a great thing to see happen in the game. The sandworms showing up after you've collected a bunch of spice down in Cialgo South. Well, now they're all dead. But you got to get them out of the Tleilaxu tanks. It's just, everything really works. It's really good. Dune Conquest, also very thematic. It immerses you in Dune really well, but streamlined. You can play a game of this in an hour. It's great for a tournament because you can get through the whole tournament in one day. Can't really do that with Classic Dune. And Classic Dune, they run tournaments for it. The World Board Gaming Championship has done a tournament every year for over 20 years. And last year they did Dune Conquest, and they reported that it worked really well because players were able to get into the action really well. They could see the factions behaving and in their classic ways, but again, streamlined. And so those are the big differences between the 2 games. You can get a sense, you can see the DNA clearly in Dune Conquest, and you're like, yes, I can see that this is a lot like Dune, but it is a little more accessible. It's a little more fast-paced. And as I said, we're working on a potential expansion that we're playtesting, possibly some new factions, depending on what's in the movie, some other stuff that I think will make things interesting, possibility of alliances. We're not sure. There's no alliances in Dune Conquest. It's too quick for that. You just got to fight it out. It's every faction for themselves. So let me know if you have any other questions about these 2 games to help you figure out if one would be better for your group over another. If you have some questions about how the factions work or how the game works, or some experiences to share, let me know. I want to hear about that. And if you want to be a playtester on potential expansions for Classic Dune and Dune Conquest, join the Future Pastimes Discord. There's a link in the about this YouTube channel, so you should be able to figure it out and reach out to us there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again.